Alright, if I asked you to name the three most populous countries on Earth, well, that would be pretty easy. China, India, and the United States. But who comes fourth? Well, believe it or not, it's Indonesia, home to more people than the entirety of Western Europe, a land of secrets and ancient mystery, and that applies to the food, too. Indonesian cuisine is one of the last great culinary frontiers, packed with bold flavors and fascinating techniques, and some of the best ingredients anywhere on the planet. It's influenced other cultures, inspired famous dishes, but the food itself, well, somehow it's stayed off the international radar. So today we're diving in. From everyday essentials to the legendary feasts, we're on a mission to understand not just the cuisine, but why it's so unknown, and if that's starting to change. It's the story of Indonesian food, today on OTR. This is Indonesia, the home to some 280 million people, spread across a vast territory wider than the continental US. It's home to Jakarta, the planet's second largest city, and the island of Bali, a top 10 global destination for travel. But after that, well, on the tourism map, it's a giant blank spot. Somehow, in an era where we're exploring the deepest regions of space, we know so little about Indonesia that we don't even have an official count of the islands. The best guess is somewhere around 17,000, but that number seems to change with every new estimate. And on those islands, well, we don't know who's actually living there either. The Indonesian government recognizes 1,331 different ethnic groups, but even they acknowledge that list is incomplete. It's probably better to think of Indonesia less as a single country, which it's been only since the 1940s, and more as a collection of the countless kingdoms, sultanates, and tribal polities that have waxed and waned since the beginning of recorded history. The Indonesian islands were home to empires as vast as the Sriwijaya and the mighty Majapahit, to trading cities that changed the world's agriculture, and to feared tribes of headhunters said to still live in the jungles of Papua and Borneo. It's the world's largest Muslim country, but it's also in the top 20 for Hindus, Buddhists, and Christians, and that doesn't even include the tens of millions who still follow ancient traditional beliefs. And every single tribe, every culture and ethnic group has its own cuisine. From the Moluccas, once known as the Spice Islands, to the population centers of Java and Sumatra, all of it together makes up the food of Indonesia. So let's get started and find our first meal. Okay, so we're not shy about taking on big subjects on OTR, but this is one of the biggest and hardest that we've ever tried to tackle. What is the food of Indonesia? This is a country with 17,000 islands. There's 1,000 islands that have people that live there permanently, and and obviously when you have the fourth largest country in the world and geographically a place that stretches all the way from, close to where we live in Thailand, all the way almost to Australia, there's going to be a lot of diversity in the cuisine and trying to figure out not only how to tell the story in one video, but even for us to understand if there's anything that kind of ties it all together. We're not going to be lazy and just get some, nasi goreng, although we will have that today most likely. We want to kind of try and sort of understand what is Indonesian food. Is there anything that kind of bonds it all together? And most importantly, why does the world not know about it? Why is Indonesian food, considering how big the country is, as anonymous as it seems to be overseas? So it's a big topic, but we're going to do our best. And since that's a hard thing to start, I called a good friend of mine, Ahmad, here in Medan, and just said, hey, can we start the day? You just take us to your favorite restaurant. Where do you like to eat? And so if we're going to start somewhere, that seems to be the most logical path. All right, while we're on the way to the restaurant, I need to talk a little bit about where we are, because in a video about food, this is the most important thing to know about Indonesia. This is a country that goes hard. Whatever you might expect when you travel somewhere, you need to turn it up to 11. Here, the heat is hotter, the sounds are louder, and the smells are stronger. It's constant sensory overload in every possible way. And so when somebody invites you for breakfast, you can assume you're in for something big. So I guess it wasn't the least bit surprising when Ahmad steered us into a place the size of a football field, with 1,000 woks and grills going in the open-air kitchens, and this is how you start a day in Indonesia.
Selamat datang di Kilat Kopi. Ini semua hidangan menu makanan pagi dan siang kita. Ada sate ayam, bubur ayam, aneka sate, tempe mendoan, and then nyaci seafood, dan lontong rendang ayam.
All right, well, our first meal of the day on day 2 of our shoot in Medan, but the day that we're making our What is Indonesian Food video, I think this is a home run from our friend Ahmad. So the server already talked us through the food on the table, but lontong, which is pressed rice cake served with chicken rendang in what looks like a curry, some kind of curry sauce that I can't wait to try. Tempeh, so that's like fermented soybeans, crispy fried with kecap manis, which is the ubiquitous Indonesian condiment. It's sweetened soy sauce with chili in it. Mie Aceh, so from the very northern tip of Sumatra, Aceh province is famous for their noodles. This is a seafood version of it. Bubur, what we would call jo, which is spread all across Asia. The Indonesian version is the Jakarta breakfast staple. This with shredded chicken, some quail eggs, and offal from chicken that was brought to us just as a welcome gift, because new people come in, you welcome them with some intestines on a stick, and satay, which you don't need me to describe because you know what it is, but it's chicken skewers in peanut sauce with crispy fried garlic on top. One thing before we start eating that I always sort of drives me crazy is when you see a lot of content or magazine articles or anything about what is a certain cuisine, and all that's represented is the stuff that's in tourist districts. You go somewhere that has a fancy version of something, but to me, you want to understand a culture, you go where the people go, and apparently all the people go here because this is unbelievably popular. They've just opened their second location in 2 years, which is a little bit further out from the city center, but so famous for their coffee, snacks. It's a Sunday, so the whole city's out, and let's dive in. Our first pan-Indonesian meal of the day. Carol, let's trade these around because I know that you want the satay next to you. This is not our first shoot, so I'm gonna put this somewhere you can reach it. And all right, guys, please dive in. Let's eat. Oh, that's amazing. That's a really good version of mie Aceh.
The dishes on the table at Kilat Coffee are crowd pleasers. This is not the stuff from some long-lost jungle tribe. These are the dishes everybody in the country knows. And when you look at this table, you start to understand why describing Indonesian food is such a difficult task. In just these 5 dishes, we see things with wildly different backgrounds and flavors. Chinese zhou or congee, lontong or rice cakes cooked in banana leaves and served in a broth of coconut, these skewers of offal that look exactly like the same thing you'd see in the Philippines, and satay or grilled chicken topped with peanut sauce. Usually when we make these videos about some kind of cuisine, there's some common thread, some flavor or concept that forms the foundation of everything we're going to discuss. But there is no one taste of Indonesia. In fact, the entire category of mainstream cuisine just makes it clear how hard this story is going to be for us to unravel. To show you what I mean, in 2012, the Indonesian government decided to name a national dish. But when they couldn't agree on one, they narrowed it down to 30. Here's the list. And that's nothing. In 1902, when the Dutch were in control of what would become Indonesia, they decided they wanted to summarize the native food for the people back home. So they commissioned a woman named Catinius van der Meyden to travel across the islands and compile a list of recipes. In the end, she'd wind up collecting more than 1,300. When her publisher told her, okay, enough's enough, time to cut it off, the book would be published at a length of 862 pages, and Miss van der Meyden hadn't even visited a fraction of the ethnic groups when she stopped her work. In other words, this is not a cuisine best explained by listing a few popular dishes. It's barely explainable at all, as those foods we just showed on the surface have nothing in common with each other or in some cases, with anything. But if the rest of this video is going to have any purpose, well, we still need to try to at least attempt to find some way to explain what is Indonesian food. So let's dive in and start at the beginning. Alright, now telling a cohesive story of 1,300 tribes with thousands of unique recipes is impossible, as Mrs. van der Meyden learned the hard way. But what about just 2? Well, that's a lot more manageable. And pretty much everything at the core of Indonesian cuisine comes back to 2 original ethnic groups. The Melanesians were here first, the indigenous people of the South Pacific Islands, and their food, in the earliest days of history, would form the foundation of the cuisine of not just Indonesia, but Fiji, the Solomon Islands, and Papua New Guinea. Their meals were based around fish and beef or water buffalo, grilled or cooked into soups and served alongside root vegetables like taro and the native species of yam. They'd rely on bananas, native to the island of New Guinea, and once it arrived, coconut would feature prominently in food and traditional medicine. The coconut would show up around 2000 BC when a second group arrived, on boats from the Philippines. These people were called the Austronesians, and they brought their own ingredients like domesticated pigs, citrus, and most of all, rice, which would soon spread throughout the islands. They also brought their own techniques like pickling and fermenting and grilling meat on skewers, a proto-form of satay. Anyway, in the beginning, the tribes coexisted, the natural landscape creating a buffer. But over time, they would separate, the Melanesians occupying the islands to the east, where they'd divide into groups that would become the Makassar, the Papuans, and the Moluccans. The Austronesians would settle in the west, across Bali, Java, and Sumatra, in time organizing into tribes like the Malays, the Javanese, Sundanese, and the Bataks. Each one of these and all the countless other groups would eventually chart their own courses through history, their foods changing thanks to contact and influence with outside kingdoms and empires. But at their core, they were all connected by shared ancestry, and that's not all that would bond them together. The Indonesian archipelago was blessed with natural abundance, thanks to its tropical climate and rich volcanic soil. And while there's massive diversity from east to west, by the time we see the first written records, well, quite a few ingredients had spread across the region. Spices like cloves, nutmeg, and galangal, along with other aromatics less famous abroad like candlenut and the truffle like keluak. There were fruits like bananas, along with mangosteen, durian, and jackfruit. And other native plants would catch on as well, including lemongrass and pandan, both originally from what's now Indonesia. Across almost all tribes and settlements, rice would make up the foundation of the diet. And to this day in Indonesia, it's more than just a staple. Curries, stir-fries, even soups and stews are spooned on top of rice before consumption. Rice makes up the centerpiece of Indonesia's holiday feast, the Javanese Nasi Tumpeng, and the country's most iconic dinner, Nasi Padang, from Sumatra's Minangkabau. And then, of course, there's lontong and its older relative ketupat, which is so ancient it was probably already being made by the Austronesians when they first left the Philippines. The ingredients of the islands and techniques of those two original groups would make up the basis of all Indonesian food. But the fun part is exploring the tribes that would take shape over thousands of years, separated by ocean and jungle. Each group would follow its own path, meeting new cultures and taking on new religions and absorbing other foods, which makes every ethnic meal a path through history. So let's keep eating. For our second meal, we chose a place called Koki Sunda, mainly because it just happened to be right down the street from Kilat Coffee. Here, the regional specialty is the food of the Sundanese, the people native to West Java, centered around the city of Bandung. The Sundanese are Indonesia's second largest ethnic group, making up around 15% of the national population, 41 million in total. They're Austronesians, who nearly 2,000 years ago became the first from the islands to establish ties to the Indian subcontinent, becoming Hindu as far back as the 4th century AD. Thanks to their strategic location along the Sunda Strait, they'd play a role in the maritime Silk Road, where they'd encounter Chinese traders and cooks. And during the Age of Exploration, the Dutch would make Bandung their center of tea and coffee production, why today, even abroad, the latter is known as Java. Their food, like every Indonesian ethnic group, would become their own unique melting pot, ancient and modern, familiar and unfamiliar, all at the same time.
All right, Sundanese food. So the Sunda Strait is the little bit of water that separates Java from Sumatra. Sundanese people, the second biggest ethnic group in Indonesia and mostly concentrated in West Java. Cuisine that is not much like what you'd find here in Medan for the local food, but it does have a lot in common with not just Javanese, but also Filipino food. Because the Sundanese were Austronesians who came by way of the Philippines. I'm curious if Carol, who's one of our directors, recognizes any of this stuff. She comes from Philippines. Anyway, Sundanese food based around this, which is lalab, fresh fruits and vegetables served with spicy sambal. But in general, Sundanese food is not the spiciest of Indonesia's cuisines. This is the signature dish of this restaurant, which is going to be like, it's almost like a gado-gado, but with fresh instead of cooked vegetables. We have cucumbers. I actually don't know what's in here. We're going to dive in. But tossed into peanut sauce. We have rice wrapped in a banana leaf, which is classic for Sundanese food. We have sata, as we call it in Thailand, or petai here. We have a stir-fried water morning glory dish. And we have a different kind of satay because in Indonesia, wherever you are, there's going to be some form of meat on sticks. In this case, it's beef served with ketchup manis with chili. And then the signature of Sundanese food is seafood, especially grilled fish that's going to be drenched in a really beautiful, sweet sauce. And yeah, let's start. the server, I almost didn't order this, and she said you'd be making a gigantic mistake. This is our signature and very important for Sunda cuisine. And so when the camera stops rolling, I'm just gonna be here just munching on these. This is like my absolute weakness. In fact, I'm gonna make that my first bite, just a little grilled pad thai. You'd see this is like in southern Thailand. You just find this by the side of the road, grilled like this. I should not have made this my first bite because now my palate is a mess. I'll just keep eating it. See, that to me, man, everything's amazing. That to me is like the signature flavor of Sundanese food, is kind of smoke. Like you have the sweetness, you have the brightness, you have the fresh vegetables, and maybe somebody who's actually from West Java would tell me that I'm incorrect, but I always associate this kind of food primarily with smoke, with fish or chicken that's grilled over wood. And yeah, you taste smoke before you taste any other flavor. It's amazing.
The point of coming here isn't that Sundanese food is critical to this story, even though I guess it is as one of the country's biggest ethnic groups. No, the idea is that you could repeat this 1,331 times from one side of the islands to the other, everywhere with its own specialties and flavors, and this is what I mean about the scope of Indonesian food. The vastness of the diversity actually caused a problem when the country gained independence. See, the first president, Soekarno, found himself governing a massive group of islands with huge differences in culture. From the beginning, there was tension, and Soekarno knew he'd need to show the people that they belonged to the same society. So 60 years after Mrs. Vandermaiden, he too set out to document the nation's recipes, and he'd make this his highest priority. Now, the president had 3 goals with his work. First, to foster a sense of national identity, to make sure old dishes wouldn't be forgotten, and to show the world the pride of the brand new country, its amazing cuisine. He'd assigned the task to his highest ministers, and they'd spend 5 years compiling all they learned into a massive volume called Mustika Rasa, or the Gems of Flavor. This was to be the global coming out party for Indonesian food and the country itself, a masterpiece of 1,200 pages, showcasing not only foods but ethnic history, ancient techniques, and guides to ingredients. But before the book was finished, a failed coup in 1965 threw Indonesia into chaos, and all Soekarno was able to print were a few copies of an incomplete manuscript, just in time before he was arrested, put into custody, and the country would collapse in violence. And this brings us to the next part of this story. All right, we'll start in 1967, after 2 years of massacres left as many as 2 million people dead, a genocide almost ignored by history. In the end, power would be seized by one of the men behind the slaughter, known as Suharto, who would take his place alongside the region's autocrats in the troubled years after the end of colonization. Nearly all of Southeast Asia saw crisis and tragedy throughout the following decade, but when things would improve in Malaysia, Vietnam, and Cambodia, well, in Indonesia, things went from bad to worse. At the same time as tourists and backpackers were discovering the region, exploring the tropics and the old historic cities, well, here there was mass oppression, political violence, and thanks to corruption, well, 1/5 of the country's jungle was burned to plant palm oil and rubber trees. The only part of Indonesia that would be presented for tourists was the tiny island of Bali, used by Suharto to bring in foreign currency to prop up his regime. When Suharto finally fell in 1998, well, Bali was going to be the starting point, the building block to catch up with the neighboring countries and finally open up to the world. But then came the bombings, ordered in 2002 by Osama bin Laden, targeting Bali's tourists as punishment for the war on terror. 2002 was the same year Anthony Bourdain would debut his first TV show. Travel culture would change and the world would fall in love with Asian cuisine. Everyone was suddenly racing to try the nearest Thai restaurant or Vietnamese place. But Indonesia, well, that didn't exist, at least in public perception. And at home, well, things were about to take an even more tragic turn. On Boxing Day 2004, an earthquake off the coast of Aceh caused a tsunami, killing 200,000 people all at once in Sumatra alone. By the end of the 2010s, Indonesia had a reputation as a dangerous place, a failing country with broken down roads and the world's worst domestic airlines. And that reputation would be hard to shake. To this day, the world's fourth largest country ranks just 27th in foreign arrivals, and if you took out Bali, it would come in 60th, one spot after Iraq. Indonesian food would never reach the outside world, and adding insult to injury, the few dishes that did break through did so as part of other cuisines, like satay, which you probably know of all things as Thai peanut sauce. But the one thing that never changed throughout all the tragedy and turmoil was Indonesia's love for food. The cuisine, or cuisines themselves, never missed a beat, even if no one else was paying attention. And that book, once assembled by the country's first president, well, even though it was never completed, well, one of its missions would finally be fulfilled, as in 2016 it would be reprinted, and a new generation of chefs bought up copies to make sure old traditions would never fade. On the western edge of Medan, there's a restaurant called Mustika Rasa, the 10th F&B venue throughout the country to open just within the last few years, recreating the recipes from Soekarno's famous cookbook. Out of all of them, this is the newest, serving its takes on Indonesian classics for just 3 months before we arrived to film. So since, unlike most of our other stops today, I've never been here before, well, I invited a guest to help talk us through the food. This is Ancha, short for Herdiansha. Like many in his tribe, the Minangkabau, he has only one name. Ancha is a legend in the Medan culinary scene. In fact, he was my business partner way back in 2013 when we launched the first food tours ever on the island of Sumatra. And I figured this would be a good chance to get a local take on both this restaurant and the broader concept of Indonesian food in general.
So the topic is, what is Indonesian food? And this restaurant is a fascinating place to see a different side of that story. Neither of us have ever been here before. What's the concept of this restaurant?
I think this restaurant having a really, really good a concept, like especially for the Indonesian food. You know, the first Indonesian president before, he was giving an order for making a book like full of recipe of Indonesian food, like traditional food from many countries, many places of Indonesia. And so the owner of this place is having this idea, so naming of this restaurant from the name of the book.
So this is 1945 when Indonesia becomes an independent country, and to recapture a sense of national identity, they wanted to compile recipes that were Indonesian, not from the Dutch, not from colonists, but local Indonesian.
I think it's the richness of the Indonesia is the difference. You know, that's why I think it's very important for us to keeping this, to keep us different. You know. So we don't need to be the same look, the same, but we keep our difference because that makes Indonesian.
I'm going to ask you a really hard question, because what you just said, again, there's 1,000 islands in Indonesia that have people living in them, right? Full time.
Yeah.
There's even more that seasonally people are on it. It's easy to talk about the differences in Indonesia. It's harder to talk about similarities in food, but there are some. And that's my hard question for you is, can you go? You've worked in other countries before. You've traveled to other countries before. If you were a foreigner and if you're from Indonesia and you go to a foreign country, can you taste something and say that tastes Indonesian?
Yeah.
What is it? What makes food Indonesian?
It's the flavor. You know, like Indonesia have unique flavor. You know, like using like clove mixed with chili, and then and I don't know, we call it gurih and peanut, something like that. So, and always rice. You know, so this is type of the Indonesian food. It like in one plate you have rice, you have few things and mix together in one food.
What do we have on the table? There's 4 things that we ordered for savory foods, and then later we're going to get a dessert here, which is why we found this restaurant, because that's really special. We'll talk about that later, but what are these 4 things?
This is rawon. This is like pekalongan rawon, I think, and this is.
But what does that mean? What's in here?
You can try it. It's a beef. I think.
It's a beef stew.
Yeah.
Okay, it looks beautiful. Oh man, look at the color of this beef. I'll show the camera later. Carol, if you want to get in here, look at the color of that beef.
Yep.
Okay, so this is the first thing?
Yeah.
What else do we have?
This is opor, like.
It's a chicken leg.
Yeah. Not chicken leg. The name of opor is name of the how the chicken is after cooked. So this is it's normally white, like from Betawi, like Jakarta. They have more like sauce in the chicken, but all looks like white. You know, like so no like rendang is more dark or something like that, like something like that.
And then what is this? I'm gonna move the hat so you can see it.
Yeah.
Every dish here has a hat.
Yeah, this food is coming from Surabaya. So it's called tahu telur petis. So it's like a traditional, like Surabaya. You know Surabaya, the city, like the second big city in Indonesia. So it's tahu means tofu, telur and egg. So it's mixed together with the sauce.
And then the last thing, I see tofu in this dish as well.
Yeah, this is tofu, carrot, and it's like something like traditional dessert, but also with a little bit sauce.
Yeah. And is that a peanut sauce, or what do we have on top? Or we're gonna find out when we try it.
Try it.
Okay, we're gonna try it and find out.
Dishes on the table at this restaurant, just like the concept of Indonesian food in general, on the surface don't have much in common with each other, as broad and diverse as rawon, a beef soup made with kelawak seeds first recorded in the so-called Taji inscription, dating back to the early 900s AD. It would go on to be a royal favorite of the Majapahit Empire, beloved by the legendary Gajah Mada himself. Opor ayam traces back to a different Indonesian kingdom, the 18th century Yogyakarta Sultanate, where its method of braising in coconut milk pulls from Malay and South Indian traditions. And tahu telur petis is more modern, a 20th century Surabaya street food staple combining Chinese tofu with a sauce that might be the oldest thing here, made from shrimp paste and dating back to the early Austronesians. These foods together represent just 4 out of the 1,600 recipes listed in the Mustika Rasa, but it paints a picture of a country with a food scene unlike anywhere else.
So let's talk a little bit just if you're welcome to start eating while we talk, but the power went out,
Yeah.
which is a good sign for us to talk about the truth of Indonesia. It's not easy, you know, sometimes. Like the infrastructure isn't still developing.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the reasons why tourism is lower. What is your theory as to why the world doesn't know Indonesian food as well as you'd think it would? Because this is the 4th biggest country in the entire world. There's 280 million people here. why is Indonesian food not as famous as a cuisine as Thai food, Vietnamese, Malaysian, Japanese, Chinese, Korean? There's so many other Asian countries that have less people. China doesn't, but has less people. But the food is much more common. Why is Indonesian food not that way? There's a lot of reasons. It's a complicated question.
And now I think it's very easy to answer because, as a nation, our republic. It's one of the newest republic. We were independent since 1945. Which is we officially become Republic of Indonesia since that. And then, like other country who just been independence, especially back in that day, back in that time is, of course for the government, it's hard to organize, and plus with so many different culture, so many different country, islands, like 14,000 something, then it make things complicated with politics, with everything. So I think we actually start building the country, trying to develop the country is it probably since around 2000, where there is economic crisis just started around 98, So we really back in on the track. I think officially probably just around 10 years ago. So then this thing, thanks to the technology this time, because with the internet, whatever, we can move faster. So we actually making progress. That's what I think, because now we catch up with other countries only in the last 10 years. So people talk about Indonesia, about food, about the culture, about everything about Indonesia, and this time a lot more compared to like before 10 years ago.
When the outside world first discovered the Indonesian islands, in the first millennium BC with the arrival of Indian traders, well, it would be food that would put this region on the global map. As India built a monopoly on the international spice trade, they coveted cloves, mace, and nutmeg. And while a lot is made of the recipes that would arrive with the Indians, well, influence went both ways, with Austronesians from Java introducing coconuts to Kerala and Tamil Nadu, and teaching the technique of making coconut milk. The techniques of ancient Indonesia, like the country's modern cuisine, gets overlooked by history, but that's where Asia learned about wrapping fish in banana leaves, which would become Thai homok, Cambodian fish amok, and Lao mok pa. And it would be the Indonesians who would teach the Indian technique of making curry to mainland Southeast Asia, bringing their recipes to the ancient champa and khmer, which would evolve into so much of what today is indispensable. The fascination with Indonesian flavors would take a dark turn in the early 1600s, when the Dutch sought a monopoly on the famous spices, first pushing locals to sign one-sided contracts, and then in 1621, massacring the entire population of the Banda Islands, killing 3/4 of the residents and moving the rest to a Dutch fort in Java, the site of what would become known as Jakarta. As the colony grew and more tribes were displaced, the Dutch justified their mass slaughters by publishing fantastic stories across Europe, describing Indonesians as savages, primitive headhunters, and cannibals. And this would be the image accepted by the outside world until well into the 20th century. Even now, multinational companies paint a grim picture of Indonesia to cover their own exploitation of the land, with violence very much still ongoing wherever indigenous tribes refuse to give up their homes, in Aceh, Sulawesi, and New Guinea. Indonesia stays off the global map in part because that's what a lot of people want, because when the world doesn't pay attention, it's easier to get away with almost anything. The end result of all of this is that because of how rich the Indonesian land is, the people stay poor. According to the IMF, the country ranks 117th in the world in per capita GDP, but even that's misleading as the 4 richest people have as much money as the poorest 100 million put together. The irony is that if it wasn't for the magic of Indonesian food, for the local fruits, vegetables, and spices, Well, you could make a strong argument that the country wouldn't have been through so much tragedy. And it's even more ironic that if outsiders came back now for the very same reason, to explore the flavors and incredible ingredients, well, that might actually prove the solution to the problem. Or at the very least, well, the rest of the world would finally get to taste this stuff fresh, prepared in the same way that first drew traders to the islands. Ever since the first outsiders arrived on the islands, well, they'd have heard the sound of heavy stones grinding out a sauce meant to cover whatever might be fresh, straight from the fruit trees and vegetable gardens. Rujak first shows up in the written record on the same inscription that mentioned rawon, dating back 1100 years to the Javanese Mataram kingdom. But even then, this was regarded as ancient, and variations had already spread far and wide. Today, rujak in some form is beloved across Indonesia, in Singapore, Malaysia, and even India. And historians think that this was the earliest ancestor of what would become gado-gado, Sundanese karadok, and the tahu telur from Surabaya. There are more than 24 styles listed just on Wikipedia, all with different sauces and components, but here we get the version from North Sumatra, with the freshest ingredients topped with a sauce made from pounded peanut, tamarind, salt, and chili, all made with the patience it takes to get everything just right.
Kenapa pakai ini teh?
Iyalah, namanya alami, giling, di blender nggak enak.
Oh gitu, dia blender halus sekali ya?
Ya, ini cabai giling goreng aja lain beda rasa ya kan.
Iya.
Coba kalau gitu,
Iya.
di blender sama digiling. Enak digiling kan?
Iyalah.
You know, so we've talked so much today about Indonesian food and culture and the people, but what we haven't really talked about is the abundant natural ingredients. The Spice Islands are in Indonesia, right?
Yeah.
This is like the home of fruits and vegetables that are, you know, sold all over the world in grocery stores, but from here or grown here. The volcanic soil obviously gives, you know, makes some of the best fruits in the world. The climate, the fact that we're in the tropics, if we're talking about Indonesian food, we have to talk about fruits,
Yeah,
right?
of course.
What is this?
Name is Rujak. You know, Rujak. It's very traditional. You know, Rujak is famous in all over Indonesia, but every places they have a different way of making the sauce.
And that also includes it's in Malaysia, it's very popular, in Singapore too, but they also make it differently. But it is probably originally Javanese because the word rujak comes from Javanese, but 1,000 years ago.
Could be.
You know, and by now, as you said, it's popular everywhere. I like the version in Sumatra because I like the fruits in Sumatra, and we're very close to a place called Berestagi, where the volcanoes, and there's so much great fruits that grow. What's in the sauce? You were telling me, so it's obviously based around peanut, palm sugar, a little bit of salt, and chili, but the secret ingredient, which I didn't know until you just told me, is, give me the Indonesian name one more time.
The pisang batu.
Pisang batu.
But it's the raw one.
So what that is basically, we call it the ancestor of the banana. It's like a primitive form of banana that's sort of closer to a plantain in the way it looks.
Yeah.
It has seeds, and to use it as a binding agent to make the sauce nice and sort of thick and sticky, there's the meat and the seeds of the pisang batu ground up in here.
It's I think you know, like this is very old recipe that actually they, you know, like beside of it is in fact it giving like a better flavor for this kind of rujak, this kind of the peanut sauce, but also I think because they believe it, You know, like you try, you know, like if people maybe trying to make it without the banana, the pisang batu, I think the taste not much different because the main thing is the same. But
It's the texture.
yeah, it's the texture.
The funny thing, do you remember the first time that you took me to this street?
Yeah.
So, the mosque across the street was built in 1906.
Yeah.
This street has been here since before you were born.
Of course.
The stone that they're using to grind the
Is it my
peanuts
age?
on is the same age as
Yeah,
you.
of
It's
course.
45.
Yeah.
That stone. Remember the first time that you ever brought me here? This is something that I wasn't familiar with until I tried it here for the first time
Yeah,
when I was
I
in my
remember
20s.
that.
You remember that night? I insisted we come back here 2 more times that night to get another portion.
Yeah, yeah.
This is just so like sweet, savory, sour, salty. It's just every flavor profile all in one. It's amazing.
Yeah.
And it's always a little bit of a surprise what's going to
Yeah.
be in it
Yeah.
because it's what's in season. It's
Yeah.
when they go to the market, what fruits are being sold.
Yeah.
And in this case, what do you think we have? There's almost always papaya. I can see that right
Yeah,
away.
pineapple,
Pineapple for
Yeah.
sure. This
water apple.
water apple is which if you don't know water apple, because that's not really something sold overseas.
Yeah.
It almost tastes
Cucumber.
like cinnamon.
Yeah.
We have cucumber today.
Yeah.
Yeah, the water apple's like my
Yeah.
favorite, but it's a complicated flavor.
Yeah. You know, like basically the fruit that they use. Yeah, of course, is the fruit that it's a watering fruit. Then it giving like you know like.
This is watermelon too.
Yeah, it's like giving the experience. You know, like when you're eating it, so you can feel the flavor of the taste of the sauce is really like blowing on your mouth. You know what I mean? So
This is so addictive. I am gonna apologize to Dennis and Carol. There are more spoons over there, but I'm gonna claim this one. There's only one in the bowl. I'm
But-
just gonna start eating the
yeah,
sauce.
but the thing is, you know, like at the rujak is a food. It's rujak is a food symbol of being together, because you're not eating rujak by yourself. You're not getting a rujak and eating one portion by yourself.
Right now, at this exact moment, I am eating rujak by myself. So
Yeah.
let's start.
Yeah.
Let's stop talking
So,
and
yeah.
start eating. Join me.
So
Grab
it's
some.
rujak is you get one portion, big,
Yep.
spicy, then you eat together. Because when you eat together, everyone wants, you know, like it's racing to eat.
All right, I want these guys to get to try it too. So let's have a couple bites for the camera and for. It's great as always.
So, what is Indonesian food? Well, I guess the most basic explanation is it's a combination of the ingredients, the people, and the history. And of course, it's all about sharing. Everything is meant to be enjoyed with whoever's around, regardless of someone's ethnic group or background, and that just makes it even more of a shame that so few people get to experience firsthand Indonesian hospitality. But combining all of those elements that make up this cuisine might be the reason outside perception is starting to change. There is one reason for hope, that one day Indonesian food might finally join the global pantheon and the world's 4th largest country will stop being invisible. And it's because of a meal that takes everything we've talked about so far and combines it all into a celebration of food, culture, and family. And it's a meal that just happens to come from right here, on the island of Sumatra. In a country all about sensory overload, and with a cuisine less about individual dishes than broad diversity, well, it makes sense that Indonesia has given rise to what might be the world's biggest and most exciting meal. It's called Nasi Padang, and maybe more than this video, more than the Mustika Rasa or Mrs. Vandermaiden's cookbook, this is Indonesian food, in full Technicolor display. Nasi Padang began from the wet markets of Padang, in the west of Sumatra, where Minangkabau vendors would meet up at the end of a long day to share their foods with each other, in a massive feast. Now, Indonesian people have long been aware of their country's broad culinary heritage, celebrating holidays with nasi tumpang and toasting weddings with prasmanan, not surprisingly Suekarno's favorite meal. These spreads of countless flavors and colors would inspire the Dutch Rijstafel, their own showcase of the food of the islands. But Nasi Padang would perfect the art form. When it arrived with the Minangkabau in Medan in the 1880s, the tradition would expand, adding in dishes from the Malays, the Javanese, Achenese, and Nias Islanders. And as it slowly worked its way south across the archipelago, well, it became something of a vacuum, scooping up favorites from every town and city. Now, Indonesia might have missed out on the tourism boom of the 1980s, the food TV explosion of the 2000s, and the foreign restaurant boom of the 2010s. But social media, well, it's starting to discover Nasi Padang. This is the meal that's starting to attract influencers to the country. It's eye-catching on Instagram, and while Michelin still hasn't come to Indonesia, well, the guide at least pays tribute to this one delicacy. There's no better showcase of what makes Indonesian food unique than seeing all of it laid out on one single table. So for our dinner, well, it's time to feast. For 53 years, restaurant Sederhana in Medan's downtown has been serving some of the city's best Nasi Padang, famous for their specialties like beef rendang and Sundanese galangal fried chicken, and a few dozen other favorites that rotate depending on the day and the mood of the cooks. The magic of Nasi Padang is that whatever you see, well, that's what you get. You sit down at a table, order a sweet iced tea and a pack of clove cigarettes, and just let the rest of the night happen, as one by one small plates get filled up with miniature portions of everything, from Sumatran curries to Malay-style sambals to the slow-cooked stews of the ancient Melanesians. And you only pay for what you consume. Or at least that's what they tell me, because when I'm here, well, come on, I'm consuming everything. Is it cool to you that this is a Sumatran food? It's Padang is West Sumatra. The Medan version of it is famous all over the world. And that's where I'm going with this, is that this is now famous all over the world. Everywhere in Indonesia, you eat Nasi Padang, some variation of it, this style of eating. How does that feel for you as a guy who's from North Sumatra, who has family from Padang? Like, is this cool that this has become such a sensation everywhere? I mean, it's amazing. Why wouldn't it be?
It's always same feeling, man. Every time going to Padang restaurant like this, only one feeling. I'm so hungry.
Yeah. All right, the magic of Nasi Padang. This is the meal, the style of eating that made me fall in love with Medan, Sumatra, Indonesia, living in Asia, food in general, whatever you want to say, this is just unbelievable. We're at a Nasi Padang restaurant that's been open since 1972. Tonight, it's different every day depending on what whoever's cooking makes or what's sold out. We have 21 plates on the table. Anja, can you tell us what everything is in rapid fire succession?
Yeah. Start from the asam padeh. It's really spicy, like fish, lamb curry, egg, tendon curry. This is like something like beef in dendeng sambal, fish. This is really good.
I asked him to be fast. He is racing. Okay, this is
tapioca, like smashed tapioca curry, barbecue chicken, green chili sambal. You know, already rendang, dark rendang like, and salty fish, like little fish with tempeh and
eggplant.
Yeah, eggplant. Yeah. And jackfruit.
Young jackfruit curry. You might need to stand up to get over to this side.
Yeah, this is this is one of the type. You try this. This is the omelette, like typical Padang food omelette.
Okay.
Yeah, this one chicken, fried chicken, also another curry, and fried sniper, red sniper, and jengkol. You know jengkol? Jengkol is the best. Like this one is chicken rendang. Yeah, that's all.
And the plates that we didn't point at are also beef rendang. We got some extras of those.
Also, by the way, just one quick note: if foreigners have never been to Indonesia before, you sit down at a Nasi Padang restaurant, they bring you these bowls. That's
Don't
not
drink.
soup. Don't drink it. That's water to wash your hands.
Yep.
All right, so we start with I'm gonna just start.
Yeah.
I'm gonna be a savage and start with the rendang because it's
Yeah.
staring right at me. It's right in front of me.
Yep.
What else are we gonna put in this first handful? This looks amazing. I've had this plenty of times with the tempeh and the small fried fish, but with eggplant is interesting. That's a cool take on this.
I think I prefer this one with jengkol.
Yes. Jengkol is mildly poisonous. Don't let that dissuade you.
Yeah.
All the best foods
Yeah.
have a slight risk involved.
The room service at the hotel won't be happy if you eat jengkol too much.
Well, I remember when you came and joined us today, what was I doing? I was in the middle of just eating satol pods. I was in the middle of eating the petai.
Oh.
So the hotel's already not, and we've had durian the last 2 nights.
Yeah.
The hotel's not loving me no matter what. Indonesia is a country that deserves to be explored. I'm not here to do yesterday's shoot was to do an infomercial for Medan, which is one of my favorite cities. But this is not about Medan, this is not about Sumatra, this is just the country of Indonesia. 99% of tourists who come here go to Bali, maybe Lombok. That's it. There's thousands of, without exaggerating, thousands of other islands that should be explored. You guys, again, how nice has everybody been? The smiles we get everywhere, right? Everywhere. How nice the people have been. People are honest, right? You can generally, like, you land and you have a whole bunch of new friends. Food's incredible. I love this country and I wish more people took the time to explore it and not be intimidated by how overwhelming it is, because you will adjust. And the reward is something like this.
All right, I guess we set out today to answer one question. What is Indonesian food? Now, I warned you right in the beginning that this was going to be a challenge. And even with 5 meals down, God knows how many plates of food served, we obviously haven't even scratched the surface. Even trying to tell this story has been tough. Talking about Indonesian food means confronting some grim parts of history, making sense of a place that's been treated as a commodity for more than 500 years. But it's also that history that made this place what it is now, somewhere everything's meant to be shared, and where at the end of a long day, in the sensory overload, in the heat and humidity, you still somehow don't want to go home. So what is Indonesian food? Well, it's fresh fruits and vegetables, cloves and nutmeg, peanut sauce, and slow-cooked beef rendang. It's Aceh noodles, fish grilled in banana leaves, and fresh rujak on the side of the road. Indonesian food is the cuisines of 1,331 different ethnic groups, with the influence of just about everyone who stopped by from the days of the Silk Road to the age of exploration. It's Austronesian and Melanesian, Batak and Malay. It's the islands of Sulawesi and Borneo, Timor, Bali, Sumatra, and Java. It's 30 national dishes and 21 plates on the table at dinner. Indonesian food is the world's biggest mystery. But it shouldn't be. It's not hiding. It's not trying to keep its secrets. The people here would love nothing more than for the world to come and enjoy it with them. Because this is a culture about sharing. And I mean, as a traveler, Where else is there this much to explore? Subscribe to the channel for more from OTR. Thank you so much to everyone who supports us on Patreon. It really helps to keep us going. Find links below to our Patreon and social media, and we'll see you soon.